Hi, everybody. Thanks for checking in. Today, I'm going to go over 6 different types of arguments. Now, there's many more than 6 types of arguments, but the 6 that we're going over here are really common types of arguments that you probably make a number of times in any given day. Okay. I encourage you to take notes in your notebook as I go along here, and the software that I'm using only allows me to record my screen for 15 minutes at a time. So I'm guessing that I will probably break this recording into 2. Let's get started. The first, oh, by the way, these 6 types of arguments are covered in Ramage and Bean's book, Writing Arguments. So the way that I'm presenting them here is a reflection of how they're presented there. So our first type of argument is a simple categorical argument. And with all of these types of arguments, we're going to begin with the question, because every claim is an answer to an unstated question. So if I tell you that my favorite place to get tacos in Houston is Teotihuacan, so the claim is Teotihuacan has my favorite tacos in Houston, then the implied question that claim answers is, hey, where do you think is the best place to get tacos? Or where's your favorite place to get tacos? So with each of these, we're going to start from the question that it answers. And we're going to use variables, right? Just like in math, we use X and Y, and that could stand in for anything. And I'll explain that as I go along. So with a simple categorical argument, the question that it answers is X a Y? Okay, in this case, the X is just going to be any particular thing. Could be anything, right? Just any old thing, right? And the Y right here is a category. And so we're asking basically, does this thing fit into this category or fall into this category? If you think about it, what a category really is a kind of conceptual box that you can put different things in. So we might take something like American-made automobiles. There's a category, right? And you can put different things in that box, like Ford or Chevy, right? There are certain other things that do not fit in that category or that box, like Honda or BMW, okay? So the Y is this category, and the X is a thing that we're trying to fit into the category. So if our question is X a Y, then there's really 2 ways we could answer that claim. We could say X is a Y, or we could say X is not a Y. Okay, so those are the 2 different forms that the claim can take when we have a simple categorical argument. And so we might ask the question, is a shark a mammal, right? So here's our X, shark, that's a thing. Here's our Y, which is a category. Mammal's a category. We can put different things in that category, right? Like squirrels and raccoons and bears and human beings. Okay, and then our argument would be an answer to that question about whether a shark is a mammal or not. Now, you're probably thinking, no, it's not a mammal, right? And you're right, right? But the reason that a shark is not a mammal is because we already have an existing definition of our Y term. Our Y term is mammal, and there's already a definition of mammal that we probably can all agree on. That's important, so make a note of that. In a simple categorical argument, we all agree on how the Y term should be defined. And like you learned in, say, 7th grade biology, mammals generally have 4 criteria that they have to meet to be considered a mammal. Mammals are warm-blooded. Mammals have body hair or fur. Mammals give live birth. And when we say live birth, we mean like they don't give birth to eggs that hatch or something like that. Their offspring come out alive and fully developed. So they have live birth, and they nurse their young with milk, so they lactate. So those are the 4 agreed upon characteristics of the Y term. And once we know that, then we know that the true claim, the correct answer to is a shark a mammal, is a shark is not a mammal. Okay? Now, stay with me here because it's possible to argue the opposite. Could we argue that a shark is a mammal? Yes, we could argue that, right? Now, it'd be a much harder argument to make because most people are going to say, no, it's not, right? But just because an argument isn't true doesn't mean it's impossible to make one. And I mean, maybe somebody who knows something about sharks knows that, in fact, sharks do give live birth, right? Sharks don't lay eggs. The baby sharks come out swimming and alive, okay? So, in that sense, like a shark is a weird animal. It's hard to categorize. But still, we'd all agree that a shark is not a mammal. And this is something you need to understand about the simple categorical argument. Is simple categorical arguments are not debatable. Simple categorical arguments are not debatable. That means, there is a correct answer to this question. We can't really debate it. I mean, you could say that a shark is a mammal, but you'd be wrong. And because the simple categorical argument is not debatable, we're really not interested in it for the purpose of our class, right? Because for our class, we're really only interested in debatable claims, arguing debatable claims. And before we move on to our second type of argument, I do want to emphasize again that in the simple categorical argument, we all agree on the definition of Y, whatever the category is, whether it's mammal or something else. We all agree on how the Y category is defined, and that's why the simple categorical argument is not debatable. Okay. So let's move on to definitional arguments, okay? So, definitional argument, the question that every definitional argument answers is X a Y, okay? Now, you might be thinking, well, this sounds just like the simple categorical argument, and you're right so far, but just stay with me. So, in the definitional argument, where the question is X a Y, X, again, is a particular thing, could be anything, and Y, again, is a category, okay? So this means that if we ask the question, is X a Y, there's 2 different forms that claim can take again. X is a Y, or X is not a Y. Okay, so far, everything is the same as it was in a simple categorical argument. Here's the important difference. In the definitional argument, we do not agree on the defining characteristics of Y. So in other words, when up in the simple categorical argument, the category Y, whatever it was, has to be something that we all agree on. And that's what makes it not debatable, because it's just a matter of saying, well, does X match the definition? Yes or no? Okay. But here, Y, the category, we don't agree on the defining characteristics of the category. And so, let's say we could have a question, is fishing a sport? So here is our X, fishing, a particular thing. And here is our Y, a category, sport. Now, we can probably agree that certain things definitely fit into the category of sport. Things like baseball, football, basketball, right? But I'll bet that if we took a vote as a class, we'd have some disagreement about whether or not fishing is a sport. And what this tells us is we all know what fishing is, right? But we disagree probably on what the characteristics that make a sport are, okay? And that's why this is different, why it's a definitional argument, because in a definitional argument, we do not agree on the characteristics of Y. And so, when we're going to prove this, and notice it's debatable, you could make a good argument for fishing is a sport. You could also make a good argument for fishing is not a sport. So in other words, it's debatable. There's good arguments to be made on either side. But let's say, right, that we want to argue that fishing is not a sport. All right, with any definitional argument, there are two steps for proving your claim. And the two steps are called the criteria match method. That's a method for proving all definitional arguments. Okay? So, there's two steps. The first step is you have to define the criteria of Y. First step is define the criteria of Y. That means telling us what are the fundamental characteristics that make a sport a sport. And then, after you've said those things, by the way, I've done that here, right? You could say, all sports require vigorous physical activity. You could say, all sports have a number of rules to follow. You could say sports tend to be entertaining to people who are watching. You could say it takes practice to get good at a sport. You could say sports have a set length or distance to the game, okay? And sports require physical fitness to excel. Now, could we come up with another definition of sport than this one? Yes, we absolutely could. The point is that I know that I'm trying to prove that fishing is not a sport. And so when I'm defining the criteria of Y, I'm trying to come up with criteria that I know fishing will not match. So we just did step one here. We defined the criteria of Y down here. Our second step is to show how X, fishing, does or doesn't match the criteria of Y. In this case, we'd be showing that fishing does not match the criteria of sport. And if we think about it, let's ask, does fishing match this? Does fishing require physical fitness to excel? No, there's all sorts of people who aren't physically fit who can do really well at fishing, right? Does fishing have a set length or distance to the game? No. Does it take practice to get good at fishing? You might be better if you practice, but it's possible that your first time fishing, you catch a really big fish, right? Is it entertaining to watch someone fish? Usually not. And the reason is because there's a long time in between catches. There's a lot of nothing happening for a long time. Does fishing have a bunch of rules? We could say no, right? Does it require vigorous activity? No, it's basically just sitting in a boat. Now, we could, essentially what we just did is prove that fishing is not a sport with these two steps. We could have argued that it is a sport, but we didn't. All right, I'm going to wrap up part one of the video here, and I'll be back in a second.